Oh. Hey, John, welcome to the party. Are you going to stay for dinner?
I have to let you know I have to leave at 5.
Hello, and welcome to the Grand Parade Podcast. My name is Matt Stickland. I am your host, and I am the City Hall reporter and editor of the independent newspaper, also called Grand Parade, because everybody loves some good brand consistency. In this show this week, we have a recap of what happened last week at City Hall. From parking for infants in Fall River, a lot of Dartmouth stuff, the launch of bird scooters, and emotion about rural sidewalks. Then, after the news roundup, I'm going to bust out the whiteboard and we're going to do some X's and O's and break down a few policies, specifically birds drunk riding policy, and what a sidewalk can tell us about the fairness of rural taxation. But first, an administrative note. For the first week of June, I will be on the road. First, to go to Quebec City to report on the Wanderers road trip for the soccer podcast I do called The Wanderer Grounds. And I say I do, but my co-host over there, Martin Bauman, runs that show. He knows the CPL like I know City Hall, and we have a lot of fun. Highly recommend you check it out. But after that, and what will be probably way less fun, is I'm going to be in Ottawa attending my dad's funeral. And the combination of being on the road and not knowing where my headspace will be at for that first week of June, it is entirely possible that there is no June 9th episode of this show or June 9 issue of the paper. But I'll keep you posted both here and on the website, so you'll know whether or not to make the trek and brave the gorgeous summer weather and support a local business, you know, in case you wouldn't go do that anyway. But speaking of the paper, issue 3 is out now in Atlantic News today and the Dark Gallery on Wednesday, so go pick up a copy. Josh Healy of hfxfootballpost.ca wrote about the stadium, and spoiler alert, the city has a stadium! Those metal bleachers? Yeah, you own those. They're ours now. It's like we're a dog and we peed on them. No. But go grab a copy. For more details, go grab a copy and read Josh's phenomenal reporting. We were supposed to get more details about the stadium last Thursday, but the Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee meeting was canceled. But what was not canceled was Monday's Accessibility Advisory Committee. They got a presentation from Treat Accessibility, a group that is trying to make trick-or-treating more accessible. After the presentation, the committee passed a motion recommending that the Executive Standing Committee get a staff report about recognizing October 16th as Treaty Accessibility Day every year. This committee started firming up the list of people who they wanted to see at their Accessibility Town Hall, including, but not limited to, someone from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, someone from Halifax Transit with some specific focuses like Accessibus, someone from the Department of Community Safety, someone from 311, someone from Public Works with some specific interests like why is everything designed and built so terribly for non-drivers, and someone from Planning and Development. Also on Monday, the Northwest Community Council met and approved a seniors complex at 445 Windsor's Drive in Upper Tantallon. Windsor's Drive, Tootles, in Upper Tantallon, and an apartment complex at 893 Sackville Drive in Lower Sackville. They also scheduled public hearings for 2 developments and a zoning bylaw change which would allow mechanics to open up shop in more places in Fall River. Also in Fall River, the Community Council reduced parking minimums for daycares since children don't drive cars. It is good news that councillors are starting to drop parking minimums even in rural parts of the HRM. This phenomena so far has only really happened inside the circumferential highway. This move also makes me more optimistic that the suburban plan might actually be closer to my wildest expectations as opposed to my more cynical ones, which is nice. On Tuesday, there was a regular meeting of council. Council increased the cap for tax-exempt properties to $425,000, meaning if your house is worth more than that, you have to pay property taxes. Council briefly considered making it $500,000, but the staff report found that a lot of the houses between $425,000 and $500,000 had been bought since 2020 and reported almost no income, but also still had active mortgages. Reading between the lines, it's a bit suspect that houses with no income can pay mortgages, but not property taxes. Councillors lamented that this was the tax relief equivalent of hitting a finishing nail with a sledgehammer, and about the general inadequacy of their tools. Dartmouth had a big day as Councillor Sam Austin got council to look at making downtown Dartmouth a heritage district and recognizing the historic black community known as the Avenue. Councillor Tony Mancini wants the city to look at making a pickleball hub and wants the city to consider Dartmouth as a location for that hub if staff determine that the city does, in fact, need a pickleball hub. Councillor Laura White put forward a motion to see what the city can do to help people in mobility scooters who get stranded by the city's transportation and zoning policy choices. After a brief debate and Councillor Kathy Daigle-Gammon pointing out that the city does take responsibility for stranding vulnerable people due to zoning and transportation policy choices with the Municipal Vulnerable Persons Registry, Councillor Laura White's motion passed. During the debate, Councillor Becky Kent made the argument that the city doesn't take responsibility for people when their car breaks down, and that they call CAA or a tow truck or take a bus or call a cab or friend or whatever, but they're on their own. But that was the point of White's motion. There is no CAA or tow trucks for mobility devices, and there is often no taxi or accessibus when people with disabilities lose their power chair. If someone's power chair breaks down, they are ship in the middle of the ocean fucked, even though they're in the middle of their own city. And I don't know about you, but if that were to happen to me, and then I heard Kent's comments, I would feel more than a little bit betrayed. And it is disgraceful that not only do we have solutions for this issue, but also that some people who shape the physical world with their power seem to think that it is the disabled person's responsibility to deal with the consequences of council wielding their power of controlling land use. But again, White's motion passed, so Halifax may start to correct this injustice. Speaking of that injustice, the city's chief administrative officer submitted a written report to council about the work done in the past year on meeting council's accessibility goals and standards. Work is slow. Speaking of being stranded, only 35% of the city's bus stops are accessible. This number has been the same since 2023. Never mind being stranded, even if you're in a power chair that is working, there's only a 1 in 3 chance you can even use a city bus stop. No wonder people are getting stranded in power chairs. They're taking them long distances instead of taking the bus. Don't they know it's their responsibility to buy a car, or their responsibility to build better accessible bus stops so they can take the bus, so they don't get stranded when their power chair dies in the middle of their trip to their only accessible by car or bus Bayers Lake clinic for their medical appointment? And they shouldn't have built that clinic for their appointments in Bayers Lake in the first place if they didn't want to get stranded. It doesn't have sidewalks. Like, what were they thinking? What were these disabled people thinking when they made all of these personal choices that caused them to get stranded all over the HRM? No wonder we need an accessibility strategy. And council also did some stuff about rural sidewalks that we'll come back to. Not cancelled on Thursday was the Youth Advisory Committee, and like the revolution, this meeting was not televised. They were supposed to receive a presentation about the state of student housing in Nova Scotia and a report about HEAT, Youth Action Team, and Summer Overnight Camp, LED. Oh, you know what? I bet you that's supposed to be lead. I bet you that's a summer camp where they teach youth how to lead and not poison them with lead, since it's not the 70s anymore. Whoops. Anyways, the Active Transportation Advisory Committee meeting met, and there are some structural changes happening within the city's active transit team that sound like they're good moves, but we'll have to wait and see. As we all remember from the Four Nations hockey tournament earlier this year, just because something looks good on paper, like Team Canada's second line, doesn't mean it'll live up to the hype. This committee also got a presentation from Bird Canada. Unlike most, if not all, of the city's transportation planning, the Bird rollout seems like it's set up to be successful. I recommend installing the app and checking out the app and the service on your own, or the city's website over on halifax.ca for more details. The big players like the CBC, as well as smaller niche people like Kevin over at HFX by Bike, have covered this pretty well. I don't know when the HFX by bike video is coming out. If it's not out yet, just wait like a day or two, and then it'll be out. Anyways, and the only thing I really want to add to this conversation is that the Bird's drunk riding policy is a really good policy to kind of break down into the X's and O's about how policy works. So Bird's policy on drunk riding is one of zero tolerance. If you get caught drunk riding, you're banned for life. This makes sense and is something that Bird has to do as a private company to reduce their own liability. Like, if you know someone is going to be using your product drunkly, you are held liable for it, you know, if you're a private company, but not if you're a city building roads, which is why? Who knows? Actually, why? Who knows? But anyways, this is not a bad policy on its own, and arguably it's not a bad policy at all, but provincial drunk driving legislation is more lenient, meaning if you are drunk driving, you can get your car and your license back. It's not a permanent ban. Meaning drunk people who are choosing between driving or riding are incentivized a little bit to choose driving. And this gets even more complex if this drunk person lives in the suburbs and normally rides a bird to work every day from the suburbs, but only drives into town every now and again to drink. And this is also further complicated by the fact that if someone is going to the suburbs, transit probably isn't an option for them if this is a Friday or Saturday night, meaning their choices are probably artificially limited in some ways. And because of the provincial regulation, it is possible that it is the quote-unquote correct or better option for this drunk person to make in their frame of mind to choose driving instead of riding a bike, which is a bit, or could be a bit of a problem. And speaking of turning into a bit of a problem, let's talk about the sidewalk in Porters Lake. At Tuesday's council meeting, they passed a motion for 5 proposed sidewalks, 1 each in Lucasville and Musquodoboit Harbor. Those are both going to get more detailed public consultation on how to structure the area rate. An area rate, for those people who don't know, is a designated rate that a certain area of the city pays for a specific service. In this case, it's going to be a specific amount of money for a sidewalk. Hubbard's will start determining what the area for the area rate should be, i.e. who will pay it, not how much will be paid. And the idea of a sidewalk was so unpopular, and the sidewalk and area rate were both so unpopular in Porters Lake and Upper Tantallon. Both of these are going to be postponed for 5 years. But when this was debated at council, this is where I really started to lose my mind on rural taxation and tax policy in the HRM, and have started going down some pretty deep rabbit holes. But anyways, at this point, I don't really have any answers, and I'm honestly not even really sure what my questions are. But I think these are some pretty big questions that I think if you're an active participant in your democracy, which let's be honest, if you're listening to this podcast, you are, these are things that you should be thinking about too. So let's get into it. I mean, unless you don't pay taxes. If you're our Swedish listener, then I don't know. Why are you listening? Matt at grandparade.news. Please let me know. Why are you listening? Anyways, in the report and throughout the debate on the rural sidewalk area rate tax, it was made pretty clear that the point of the area rate is not to pay for the infrastructure. That would require a much higher tax rate. And if we're being honest, paying for all the infrastructure in the city would require a much higher tax rate in all of the low density parts of the city. But the point of the area rate for these sidewalks is to make the rural taxpayers pay the urban rate because now they'll have access to a sidewalk. And the reason the city wants to charge people for access to a sidewalk is because according to the HRM's tax policy, the difference between the rural rate of 0.628 cents per $100 of assessed value and the urban rate of 0.661, that's like 4 cents? 4 cents per $100 of assessed value. That difference is a sidewalk. Otherwise, rural taxes and urban taxes pay for the same things. They pay for policing, solid waste, recreation programming, planning, libraries, sports fields, playgrounds, administration, fire suppression, street lighting, and recreational and community facilities, but only the municipality's share of the capital and operating costs. So other than that 4 cents for sidewalks in the rate, everything else is the same. But here's Catherine Morsk asking about sidewalks in the urban parts of the HRM at Tuesday's meeting.
A few years ago, when I realized how hard it is to get sidewalks built, I became familiar with the issue in my district, but it turned out there were 600 sidewalks in the queue at that time to be built, and we were only building 8 to 10 a year. So that was a long wait to get sidewalks. And so then a prioritization was done to get the 600 into the high priority list of 120 sidewalks, I believe, most of them in the urban service area, but not all. So and then we managed through support of council to get the sidewalk budget doubled, which means we can build 10 or 20 sidewalks a year at best. So I'm wondering what impact, if any, this rural sidewalk project will have on the sidewalks that were already designated as high priority, because I know it takes resources to build the sidewalks, including staff resources. It's often 2 years to get a sidewalk designed in 1 year and then built in the next year. So if you could just give us a sense of whether there's any impact on the high priority list, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, and that's an aggressive timeline. That's the optimistic timeline
Yes.
that you just gave me there. There's a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
So the capital funding to build new sidewalk in the urban tax boundary and in the rural suburban is from the same account. So we need to, if council wants us to proceed, we need to factor that into our budget planning. And right now, I think we mentioned in the financial implications that we have a scenario with the existing 4-year capital plan where we would try to get Lucasville built if things come together. But for other sidewalks, that's something that we'll need to factor into the capital plan going forward.
So when would we see that again here at Regional Council in terms of the budget implications for next year? Would we see that in September or?
Yeah, it would be part of the next year's capital budget.
In December then, or?
Probably, yeah.
December, yeah. Okay.
And the way that the capital plan would come to you, it wouldn't show up as a specific project unless it's in the budget for the next year. It would be something that would be reflected in the capital plan going 4 years and 10 years that you also approve.
But what I'm hearing is if this is approved, it will impact the other sidewalks that have already been prioritized.
It may. It depends on how much budget we have to work with in any particular year.
So that means there are people on hundreds of kilometers of roads in the urban area who are right now paying the urban rate, part of which is explicitly for a sidewalk that they do not have. So it seems like it might be a bit of an issue that they are explicitly paying for something they do not have, and the city has no real plan to provide anytime soon. And then Councillor Laura White asked this question and got a very interesting response. Let's see if you clock it.
With either area rate that was proposed for the number one, it seems like this doesn't pay anywhere close to what the cost of the sidewalk is. And like Councillor Morris, obviously I want to see sidewalks in places, but this just feels really unsustainable. And I don't know, maybe it's a Jerry question on rates and whatnot, but I don't see how this makes sense. How do you come to this little number that's such a small number of the real cost, and how do we equitably deliver services? Huge question, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So if you look at how much revenue we can generate in any of these rural communities, pretty much all of them, there's no way to generate enough money for the full capital construction cost if we're going to keep that rate the same as the urban rate or under the urban rate. So, it's a scenario whereby the construction of the initial capital upfront cost is going to be part of the general budget of the municipality. Similar, in urban areas, it's just part of what folks pay as their urban rate. So this, if we were going to require these rural communities to cover the full cost or even a cost shared cost, and keep their tax rate at the same or under the urban rate, it's just not possible. If we were going to assume that they would pay the full cost of constructing it.
So what I'm wondering is how do we do this with every other service we provide? I'm kind of right. I know it's not for you. Maybe Jerry wants to speak to this, but we provide a lot of services, and how do we know if we're charging the right amounts or what we're subsidizing are the right things? We know we're subsidizing our roads highly. We can't charge a toll on them. We can't. Well, sure. We would need provincial permission to do that, but I'd like to learn more in this about how we're delivering services, each service, look at each service that we're doing, and are our tax rates correct for all the different areas? Because this just seems like one very specific thing that demonstrates that we're nowhere close to covering the costs for things we want to provide.
And you may be thinking, that's so obvious, Matt. It's that the city staffer said that the city wasn't really sustainable and that property taxes don't pay for our infrastructure costs, which is... That's terrible. That is actually genuinely terrible. But no, the Keeners may have noticed that the voice belonged to active transit planner David McIsaac and not Jerry Blackwood, like Councillor White asked for. The city's chief financial officer, who was in the room, didn't come up to answer the question. Why not? Because it's not a financial question. It's a financial consequence to a political question. Blackwood and his staff have answered this question many times, in many ways, for as long as I've been watching council, which at this point is about 6 years. And they write it in reports that prompt headlines like, "Fiscal peril looms as HRM passes capital budget." And you just heard a city staffer casually say that the city is unsustainable. In earlier episodes of this show, you've heard Jerry Blackwood himself scold council when he says things like this.
Right, and I think Councillor Purdy said, not calling that out, but staff always pulls a rabbit out of the hat or does something. That's not a way that we should be doing budgets, is like at the end, going into reserves, going into one-time funding. Like, we are running out of options.
But even though everyone keeps telling council that the city is unsustainable and needs more money, and that the only ways that they have to raise money is fees and taxes, council has chosen time and again to keep fees and taxes low. That's not a fiscal problem. That's a political problem. You and I and anyone listening in Halifax pays some form of property tax, either directly or as part of your mortgage agreement or via your landlord through rent. This money pays for a slew of municipal services as listed above, which, as a reminder, is sidewalks, policing, solid waste, recreation, planning, libraries, sports fields, administration, fire suppression, street lighting, recreational and community facilities, but only the municipality's share of capital and operating costs. This money builds and maintains our roads, which requires a huge amount of capital and operational money, which is a lot of our tax dollars. And on top of all the other downsides of car infrastructure, it also means that every one of us is also who wants to use the infrastructure our taxes pay for need to make another huge capital and operational investment in a car to access those roads. Huge chunks of my private and public money is spent on massive capital and operating line items that do nothing but cost me and my city money. And at this point, there is nothing more Jerry Blackwood or any staff can say. Council just needs to start doing something. But the good news is that Council Virginia Hinch asked this question.
I realize that we're talking about certain communities, but my thing, and it's always been Bears Lake, where there's no sidewalks in Bears Lake. Why aren't we, and I mean, there's an easy way to probably charge the big box stores to get those sidewalks out there, I would think. So is that a possibility?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, the councillor. So Bears Lake Business Park is a classic example of a place that should have been built with sidewalks when it was built first time round, but it wasn't. So now we're all here in 2025, trying to catch up. There are 3 or 4 kind of areas of Bears Lake Business Park that are quite high on our high need list. I mean, there's like bus stops here and access Nova Scotia places here, and you have to walk on the gravel get there. Yes. There's bus stops here, and there's the front door to the Valley Vidge there, and there's like a pathway through the grass to get up there. So that's what, we've got about $2-ish million a year to spend on new sidewalks, and we've got a massive gap. And so when those roads are rehabilitated in Bears Lake Business Park, our goal is to add sidewalk or multi-use pathway there. I would love to tax your idea of your idea of asking the area businesses to contribute is interesting. I would say if they want to, for sure.
Ask? You're going to ask? Council's only real power is regulating land use, and you're going to ask? These big box stores are huge fiscal liabilities, and you have power over fees and land use and taxation, and you're going to ask permission. In the only place where you have any real power, you're just gonna ask these big companies if it's okay with them if you use your charter-granted powers. And then, if you ask your counselors this, they'll say, well, our lawyers gave us this different advice on how to use our tools of fees and taxation to enact policy. And then you'll say, yeah, but then they also went to the Supreme Court and somehow lost a case about regulating land use to the Annapolis Group. And then they'll say, whoa, are you calling our city lawyers bad lawyers? And then you'll say, well, no, not explicitly, except for that one time where they told you that you couldn't regulate loud car exhaust, but then a few years later, you guys tried again, and it turned out that not only could you regulate car noises, that you already were regulating car noises, but no one noticed because regulating car noises is so ineffective. But then even though it wasn't effective, you guys passed by law to do it anyway. But no, except for that one time where it was a bad team performance all around, I don't think our city lawyers are bad. In fact, I think they set up a world-leading in-house insurance shop, which is incredibly resourceful and unique way to use their skill set. But at the same time, maybe people who run an auto insurance shop aren't the right people to advise you on how to best use your blunt tools of fees and taxation and land use and transportation to best achieve your desired outcomes. Like, you wouldn't say Patrick Waugh, Martin Brodeur, or Carey Price wasn't a good hockey player just because they couldn't win a face-off. It's just not their skill set. They're a goalie. And then they would say, oh yeah, well then what would you do if you could change it, smarty pants? And then you'd say, well, the Charter Clause 94 reads like you should be able to impose a special tax on big box stores and their parking lots by basing the tax on the ratio of square meters in a property to the square meters of all commercial buildings on a property, pending provincial approval. Naturally, like 94 Tac 2 says, council may A, set different commercial tax rates for commercial property located in areas of the municipality designated by council based on the assessment of a commercial property under the Assessment Act. B, set different commercial tax rates for commercial property located in areas of the municipality designated by council based on the length or proportion of frontage of a property on a street, including a private road. And C, set different commercial tax rates for commercial property located in areas of the municipality designated by council based on the number of square meters in a property, the number of square meters in all commercial buildings on the property, or the combined number of square meters in a property and all commercial tax buildings on the property. And D, set additional tiered or escalating commercial tax rates based on factors set out in clauses A through C that are in excess of the rates set in clauses A to C and E, set additional or different commercial tax rates using any combination of clauses A to D. And then they'll say, well, yeah, but our lawyers interpret that differently, and they say you can only do one or the other, not a combo. And then you'll say, well, maybe you should get a second opinion, because a lot of the other taxation clauses, and specifically Clause E of this one, make it clear that this legislation is supposed to be written broadly and used in combination to avoid limiting your powers of taxation. And then they'll say, oh yeah, what do you know about the law? And then you'll say, mens rea, stare decius. And then they'll say, you're just saying random Latin phrases. And then you'll say, color of right. And then they'll say, that sounds racist. And then you'll say, that is kind of racist because it's what enables wage theft, but it's contract law. You know nothing about the law! Or however your conversations with your counselors go. Anyway, a long way of saying that counselors aren't using their power. And while it's easy to call this self-serving cowardice, because it is, but it is also an unfair accusation to level at counselors because these issues are in fact incredibly complex. One of the reasons this sidewalk motion is so fascinating is because it defines some aspects of what the city considers to be tax fairness, but those definitions create a lot of dissonance that is very hard to separate coherently. But just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not something that we can avoid doing. And to be clear here, what we are doing now has very negative consequences. Climate change, for example, pedestrian deaths, for example, are all consequences of policy choices made decades ago. But the longer we take to do anything, or waiting to do anything, is also a choice. And that's the choice we're currently making. But anyways, speaking of separating things coherently, we're going to leave it here this week before I completely lose the plot because of this rural sidewalk. I've written a lot about this rural sidewalk already on www.grandparade.news. It's a paid post only, but if you are a rural free subscriber, please shoot me an email, matt@grandparade.news, and I will send you a copy of this piece because I would like you to read it, and I would like to know what you think about rural taxation, both right now, before reading this piece, and after reading this piece, if anything has changed. I'm looking into rural taxation because I think this question about tax fairness and stuff is just really complex and fascinating. I have no idea how long this is going to take me to pull down. Every time I pull a thread, I'm like, oh, this is the story, and then it's something else. So bear with me. This feels like it's turning into like a summer project. I thought it was a month project, which is whatever. You don't care. That'll do it for me this week. I will talk to you all next week when we will be back for more City Hall coverage and the Leafs playoff season will be done. Oh, shots fired. Bye. Oh, I guess we'd already know, actually. We would know. You in the future will know if the Leafs are still playing hockey. How'd it go? Bye!